The air was heavy with the smell of oil, metal, and the faint bitterness of rain on desert dust. Floodlights painted the military base in shades of cold silver, stretching the shadows of soldiers who walked with mechanical purpose. Beyond the noise of engines and boots, something fragile hung in the silence, an unspoken tension that no one dared to name. Corporal Lena Hart moved quietly along the dim corridor of the maintenance hangar, her hands trembling as she carried the inspection file against her chest. She had done this 100 times before, checked every line of protocol, signed every clearance with precision. But tonight was different. The atmosphere itself seemed charged, alive, whispering that something was about to break. Inside the hangar, Sergeant First Class Damon Riker stood with his sleeves rolled up, a man of power and fear disguised as discipline. His voice always carried weight, low, venomous, and sharp enough to leave marks deeper than bruises. Around him, the younger soldiers looked anywhere but at him. They had learned what happened to those who did. When Lena entered, Riker's gaze fixed on her. "You're late," he muttered, though she wasn't. She opened her mouth to explain, but before the words could leave her lips, his hand struck, hard, fast. The folder flew from her grip, papers scattering like snow into the oil-stained air. The impact sent her backward into the metal cabinet, the clang echoing through the hangar like a gunshot. For one long second, no one moved. Not a breath, not a sound. Then Riker stepped forward, his expression empty, like he'd just swatted an insect. "Pick it up," he said coldly. But his voice trembled slightly, betraying the thing buried beneath his authority, fear of exposure. Lena's hand touched the side of her head, warmth spilling down through her hair. Blood, the metallic scent filled her nose, sharp and dizzying. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, she only looked at him. One steady, defiant glance that sliced through his arrogance like a blade. That was all it took for something inside the room to shift. Private Keller, the youngest on shift, couldn't hold his silence any longer. His voice broke as he whispered, "Sir, she's bleeding." Riker turned sharply, eyes blazing. "You didn't see anything," he hissed. "Not one of you," but Keller had already moved. His fingers shook as he pressed the emergency calm button mounted on the wall. The red light blinked, a signal that bypassed every chain of command. A silent alarm to the base's oversight network. In one motion, Riker lunged, grabbing the young soldier by the collar, but it was too late. The signal had gone through. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering dust like ash. Somewhere beyond the barracks, security sirens wailed once, short, restrained, a warning that the base command had received a level red incident report, the kind no one ever wanted to see. Lena slid down the wall, clutching the edge of a locker to steady herself. Her heartbeat was slow and deafening in her ears. She could taste iron, and behind it, humiliation. Riker stood in the center of the chaos he'd created, breathing heavily, realizing the weight of what he had just done. His rank, his career, his control, all slipping through his calloused fingers. And then the base went quiet. Power didn't fail, but something more subtle occurred. Radios stopped transmitting, phones went dead, and every soldier felt the cold hand of silence grip the air. When the silence falls on a military base, it means one thing: the upper command is already moving. Minutes later, 3 black vehicles entered through the east gate. The guards didn't salute, they only stepped aside, fear etched across their faces. Inside the first vehicle sat General Isaiah Monroe, known among the troops as the Judge. He was a man of few words, fewer smiles, and a reputation for burning corruption out of his ranks like wildfire. Behind him followed Generals Torres and Kim, each a symbol of unyielding order. The convoy stopped near the hangar. No one had called them by name. No one had expected them, and yet they arrived as if summoned by something deeper than protocol, by the weight of moral gravity itself. Inside, Riker froze. The distant sound of boots approaching made his throat tighten. Lena, now seated on the floor, heard it too, but she didn't look afraid anymore. Her hands, bloodied but steady, rested in her lap like someone who had finally decided to stop running. Around them, the air grew colder, sharper. The hangar doors opened with a hydraulic moan. 3 shadows filled the threshold, tall, composed, and radiating command. Monroe's eyes swept across the scene, the blood, the silence, the faces frozen in shock. He didn't speak, he didn't have to. His presence alone carried the sentence. Riker's lips parted, an excuse forming, but no words came. Monroe's gaze fell upon him with surgical precision, dissecting his soul. And in that moment, Riker realized the truth. This wasn't about broken protocol or insubordination. This was about humanity. And he had just crossed the one line that no rank could ever protect him from. Monroe finally spoke, his voice calm as winter rain. "Sergeant Riker," he said, "you just ended your career." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Soldiers who had watched in silence now stood straighter, their loyalty shifting, not to rank, but to justice. Lena exhaled slowly, her vision blurring, her body swaying with exhaustion. She had thought no one would believe her, but justice had arrived, not in whispers, but in the full, unstoppable weight of authority. Outside, the base gates closed with a mechanical thud, locking the world out. Inside, for the first time in years, truth had a voice. The hangar lights buzzed softly overhead, flickering against the metallic stillness that had swallowed every breath. Soldiers stood at rigid attention, the air dense with the metallic scent of oil and blood. The world outside seemed to shrink. Every hum of machinery, every gust of wind muted under the weight of what had just happened. General Monroe's boots echoed slowly across the floor. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His calm carried a gravity that made even the steel beams seem to listen. Every step toward Riker felt like judgment rendered in motion, deliberate, cold, and absolute. "Who authorized this inspection tonight?" Monroe asked quietly, his voice low but cutting through the silence like glass. No one answered. Even Riker, whose arrogance had once filled this hangar, found his voice trapped somewhere in the knot of his throat. His pulse thundered in his ears as he tried to steady himself, but Monroe's eyes pinned him like a target under a scope. "Sir," he began, his words faltering. "It was routine maintenance." "Routine?" Monroe interrupted, his tone almost curious. "War? Is that what you call striking one of your own? Routine maintenance?" The hangar fell silent again. The word striking seemed to hang in the air, tangible, heavy, as if naming the violence made it real for the first time. Riker's face flushed, and for a brief second his authority, built on intimidation, crumbled into raw fear. General Torres, tall and severe, stepped forward. Her expression carried no visible anger, only something worse, disappointment. "You think no one sees what happens here after lights out?" she asked. "You think silence protects men like you? It doesn't. Silence remembers." Her words echoed with quiet devastation. Every soldier shifted uneasily, realizing that those who had turned their eyes away were as complicit as the man who had raised his hand. In the corner, Lena struggled to her feet. Her balance wavered, the edges of her vision dimming. A medic approached but paused when Monroe lifted a hand. He turned toward her, his tone softening in a way that startled everyone present. "Corporal Hart," he said, addressing her by name with deliberate respect, "you will receive medical care and immediate transfer to the base hospital. But before you go, did anyone else witness the incident?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Her throat felt raw, her heart thrumming like a trapped bird. Finally, she nodded toward Private Keller. The young man looked terrified, but he stepped forward anyway, his spine straight, his voice trembling. "Yes, sir," Keller said. "I did. We all did." "We all did." The confession broke the invisible dam. A few soldiers lowered their eyes, shame washing over them. Monroe nodded once, slow, approving. "Then truth," he said quietly, "has already begun." Riker's breathing grew shallow. His mind raced for escape routes, but there were none. Every door had already sealed, both literally and figuratively. He tried to meet Monroe's gaze, but found nothing there to appeal to. No humanity, no negotiation. Only an implacable sense of justice that had no interest in revenge, only reckoning. Torres moved to the console, pulling up the internal surveillance feed. "Every corner of this base records," she said. "You may have forgotten that, Sergeant. The screen flickered to life. There, frozen in grayscale, was the moment Riker's hand connected with Lena's face. The soundless playback made it somehow worse. The violence stripped of noise, the brutality unadorned. The soldiers watching felt their stomachs twist. The moment was undeniable. Lena looked away. She didn't need to see it again. She'd lived it. General Kim, the quietest of the three, turned toward Monroe. "Protocol allows us to remove command authority pending review," he said. "But this isn't protocol anymore. It's rot." Monroe's jaw tightened. He gave a curt nod. "Lock him down." Two MPs stepped forward, their movements precise and wordless. They approached Riker not as subordinates, but as executioners of order. He tried to pull back, but one firm grip on his shoulder froze him in place. The cuffs clicked. The sound was small but final, a punctuation mark on years of unchecked cruelty. As they led him away, his voice cracked through the still air. "You don't understand," she provoked. Monroe's look silenced him. "You don't speak her name again," he said quietly. The words struck harder than any physical blow. Riker lowered his head, the remnants of his defiance collapsing under the weight of humiliation. As the hangar doors closed behind him, the room seemed to breathe again, heavy, uncertain, but alive. Lena swayed slightly, exhaustion overtaking her. Monroe gestured, and the medic rushed to her side, guiding her gently toward the exit. As she passed him, Monroe's voice followed, low, almost fatherly. "You did the right thing by standing," he said. "Sometimes silence kills more than violence ever could." Her eyes met his for a brief second, tired, grateful, still burning with quiet strength. Outside, the night deepened. The convoy lights glowed against the dark, cutting paths through the mist, as word of the incident began to spread through the base like electricity. Dormitories buzzed with whispers. Officers who had long turned a blind eye now found their names echoing in rumor and fear. The message was clear. This wasn't a disciplinary action. It was a cleansing. Back inside, Monroe stood alone in the now empty hangar, his reflection dim against the oil-stained floor. He had seen war, loss, betrayal. But this, he thought, was what broke armies from within. Not enemy fire, but moral decay. He turned toward Torres and Kim. "Shut down operations," he said simply. "Every division, every gate. No one leaves until the report is complete. This base doesn't reopen until truth does." The command hit like a shockwave. Lights dimmed across the compound, patrols halted, air traffic ceased. For the first time in the base's history, everything stopped. And somewhere in the distance, beneath the hum of lockdown sirens, Lena Hart closed her eyes in the back of an ambulance, unaware that her name, once dismissed and ignored, had just become the reason an entire military base fell silent. By dawn, the base had transformed from a living, breathing organism into something eerily still. A machine paused mid-motion. No engines roared. No training commands echoed across the grounds. The flag still hung over the parade field, its edges trembling in the cold morning wind, but below it, hundreds of soldiers stood in uneasy silence. Orders were suspended. Work was frozen. Inside the administrative wing, the air was thick with tension and the smell of stale coffee. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, illuminating faces pale from sleeplessness. A disciplinary tribunal had been assembled in haste, a council room that felt more like a courtroom. General Monroe presided at the head of the long steel table, flanked by Generals Torres and Kim. Before them sat a line of officers whose composure cracked under the weight of scrutiny. Monroe's voice was calm, steady, and mercilessly direct. "We're not here to discuss one act of violence," he said. "We're here to understand why it was allowed to happen." No one dared to look at him directly. Files lay open before the generals. Incident reports, disciplinary omissions, unfiled complaints, each one a wound covered too long. The deeper they read, the more the story changed shape. Riker's act wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom. Torres turned a page, her brow furrowing. 3 prior reports of verbal assault, 2 of harassment, all dismissed by the same senior officer. She lifted her gaze. Colonel Vance. The name struck like a spark in dry grass. Around the table, heads turned. "Colonel Vance," Riker's commanding officer was known for his pristine record, his connections to upper command. He was untouchable, or so everyone thought. Monroe's stare fixed on him. "Explain the dismissals." Vance's jaw tightened. "They were unfounded complaints, sir. Emotional outbursts." "No evidence, no evidence," Torres repeated quietly, sliding one of the reports across the table. The attached photo showed Lena with a split lip and bruised wrist, dated 3 months prior. "Is this no evidence?" The colonel's composure wavered for the first time. "She withdrew the report," he said stiffly. Kim leaned forward, his tone measured but cutting. "And why would she withdraw it?" Silence. Vance's eyes flicked downward. He said nothing. Torres's voice softened, but there was nothing gentle in it. "Because someone told her to. Because in this base, silence is rewarded and truth is punished." The words carried through the room like a slow, cold wind. Everyone knew it was true. Everyone had lived beneath that shadow. Monroe stood. Riker struck her. "Yes," he said, his voice heavy, deliberate. "But this entire culture allowed him to believe he could." His gaze swept the table. The strike was only the explosion. The fuse was lit years ago. In the hospital wing, Lena sat awake in a white room washed with dawn light. A bandage circled her head. Her uniform folded neatly on a chair beside her. Every sound, the distant murmur of guards, the shuffle of nurses, felt sharp and strange in the quiet. She kept replaying the moment in the hangar, the shock of impact, the way the silence had seemed to roar afterward. She wondered if that silence was still echoing across the base. Private Keller entered quietly, carrying a folder of signed statements. His face looked different now, older maybe, or simply aware. "They shut everything down," he said softly. "No one can believe it. They're saying 3 generals came just for you." Lena gave a faint, weary smile. "Not for me," she murmured, "for what was done." He hesitated, then sat beside her. "People are talking, saying you're brave." She shook her head. "I wasn't brave. I was tired." The honesty of it hung between them. Across the base, Monroe watched from the command tower as military police moved through offices, sealing records, collecting devices, cataloging everything. He could see the confusion on the soldiers' faces below, the sudden awareness that the rules were changing, that the quiet, tolerated cruelty beneath their discipline had been seen at last. Torres approached, her clipboard in hand. "Vance is resisting the order to surrender his command passcodes," she said. Monroe didn't look away from the window. "Then he'll resist from a cell, sir. This might ripple upward," she warned. "If we push too far, there'll be inquiries from Defense Command." Monroe turned to her finally. "Then let them come," he said. "If the price of honesty is noise, let it roar." His reflection in the glass looked older, wearier than he felt. He thought of the thousands under his command, the good ones, the broken ones, the ones who stayed silent because silence had always been safer, not anymore. In the hallway, Lena's footsteps echoed softly as she was escorted to debriefing. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and rain from the open windows. When she entered the room, Monroe looked up from the files. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "You understand the gravity of what you've set in motion?" She nodded once. "Yes, sir. This base may never be the same again." Her voice was steady. Maybe that's the point. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps even pride, crossed Monroe's expression. He signed the transfer papers on the desk before him and handed them to her. "You're being reassigned to headquarters," he said. "We'll finish the investigation from here. You've done enough." She hesitated. "And the others?" Monroe looked toward the window. Outside, the early light fell over the parade ground like judgment. They'll have to decide what side of silence they want to stand on. The day moved slowly. Each hour waited with consequence. By afternoon, Colonel Vance was escorted under guard to the same holding wing as Riker. The press had begun to circle the perimeter, hungry for a statement. The story of the struck corporal spread faster than the army could contain it. Inside the sealed compound, General Monroe drafted his report, a document that would ripple through the entire defense chain. Each sentence was deliberate, a blade honed from moral conviction. When he wrote Lena's name, he paused. as if recognizing that something had changed not just in her, but in every soldier who had ever watched and said nothing. That night, as the sun bled into the horizon and the lockdown lights flickered across the tarmac, Monroe stood alone again, listening to the strange quiet that follows a reckoning. For the first time in years, the base wasn't hiding anything. It was waiting. The sky above the base had turned the color of worn steel. Clouds pressed low, pregnant with rain, and the air carried that restless stillness that comes before a storm. Soldiers moved quietly through the compound, their boots muffled against the damp earth. For the first time in the base's history, orders were whispered instead of barked. Every conversation felt heavier, as though each word carried the memory of what had happened. In the command office, General Monroe sat before an open file, his reading glasses low on his nose. The report was nearly finished. Pages of testimony, recorded footage, timelines, signatures. But what weighed on him most wasn't the evidence. It was the silence that followed every line, the spaces between sentences where human cost lived. General Kim entered without knocking. "The Board of Inquiries arrived, sir. They're waiting in the North Conference Room." Monroe closed the file gently. "Then let's finish what we started." The board consisted of 5 senior officials flown in overnight from Defense Command, men and women whose reputations gleamed like polished medals. They had the power to undo everything, to bury truth under bureaucracy. But as Monroe and Torres presented their findings, as they spoke of patterns, of ignored pleas, of a woman struck down in front of her peers, something shifted in the air. When the surveillance footage was shown, even the most seasoned officers could not look away. There was no sound in the clip, no dramatics, just the unmistakable violence of one hand meeting another human face, a single unrelenting moment. After it ended, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, the chairwoman of the board leaned forward, her voice measured. And the general's decision to shut down the base, Monroe met her gaze. "Necessary," he said simply. "If a foundation is cracked, you don't keep building on it." The response hung in the air, simple and absolute. Outside the conference room, Lena Hart waited. She wore a clean uniform now, her hair pulled back, the bandage replaced with a faint line across her temple. A reminder, but not a mark of defeat. She could hear muffled voices through the door, fragments of sentences, the rustle of paper. Her hands were steady. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that hangar days ago. When the doors opened, Torres was the first to emerge. Her expression carried quiet satisfaction. "It's done," she said. "Riker's being court-martialed. Vance too. The board is initiating an ethics overhaul for all field commands." Lena nodded slowly. She didn't smile, not yet. Justice was a strange thing. It didn't feel like victory, only release. "General Monroe wants to see you," Torres added, and stepped aside. Inside, Monroe stood near the window, his cap resting on the desk beside the now-sealed file. Rain had begun to fall, thin streaks tracing down the glass. He turned when she entered, studying her for a moment. "You remind me of someone I knew once," he said quietly. "A lieutenant who refused to obey an order she believed was wrong. They broke her career for it. 20 years later, we called her a hero. We always seemed to learn too late. Lena didn't know what to say, so she said nothing." He approached, his voice gentler now. "The press will want your story. They'll call you things you're not. Victim, whistleblower, rebel. You can let them, or you can choose your own title." She met his gaze. "I don't want a title, sir. I just want the truth to stay louder than the lies." Monroe's eyes softened. "Then you've already done more than most." He handed her an envelope. Inside were her reassignment papers, an official transfer to Headquarters Division, Advocacy and Ethics Bureau. A new start in a place where her voice might actually change something. "Go home first," he said. "Rest. Let the noise fade. Then decide what comes next." She took the envelope, her fingers brushing his briefly in quiet gratitude. As she stepped outside, the rain thickened, soaking the parade ground, washing the dust from the insignias and flagpoles. The base that once reeked of fear now smelled of wet earth and steel and renewal. Private Keller met her by the gate, holding out a small duffel bag. the one she'd left behind. "They say they're naming the new training hall after you," he said awkwardly, as if the words felt too heavy to carry. She smiled faintly. "Don't let them. Name it after everyone who spoke up." He nodded, unsure if he understood, but the meaning lingered anyway. By the time the convoy arrived to take her away, the base looked different. The soldiers who had watched in silence that night now stood straighter, their eyes following her, not with pity but respect. And in their gazes she saw something change, something small but alive, courage. The vehicle door closed softly behind her. Through the window, the blurred shapes of the base receded into mist. She thought of the hangar, of the metallic clang of impact, of the way the world had gone still afterward. That sound would stay with her, but so would another. The echo of boots approaching, the calm, unyielding voice of justice arriving when no one thought it would. Hours later, Monroe stood at the same window, watching the convoy's lights vanish into the distance. Torres approached quietly. Command approved the shutdown review. "They want us to draft the new conduct doctrine by next quarter." He nodded. "Good. Let's make sure it means something." "Do you think she'll come back?" Torres asked. Monroe didn't answer for a moment. "If she does, this place had better deserve her." Rain drummed softly on the roof, rhythmic and cleansing. For the first time in years, Monroe felt something like peace. The base would recover. Not because the generals demanded it, but because one woman had refused to accept silence. And somewhere beyond the wire fences, as the storm broke open across the desert, Corporal Lena Hart leaned her head against the window of the moving convoy. The reflection staring back at her wasn't the same woman who'd entered the hangar. Her eyes carried something fierce now, something unbreakable. She whispered to herself, barely audible above the hum of the tires, "No more silence." The words disappeared into the rain, but their echo lingered. Through corridors, across parade grounds, through the hearts of those who had watched and stayed quiet. On that base, from that day forward, silence would never mean safety again. And as the storm rolled on over the horizon, justice, slow, relentless, human, kept marching behind it.